Hello and welcome to the Mindful Men podcast, a show inspiring men to be mindful about their lives. Each week, we'll dive into a range of topics that matter to men and hear from everyday people doing extraordinary things. So if you love the show, please give it a 5-star rating and share it with your mates. Now, before we get into this week's episode, please note that some of the content may trigger you. And if this happens, please reach out to your support networks. It's really important. If you can't get enough of Mindful Men, head over to our website. It's www.mindful-men.com.au. Find the show notes and the links to our socials there. But for now, sit back, relax, and let's get mindful. G'day guys, and welcome to another episode of the Mindful Men podcast. I'm your host, Simon Rinnie. And today we're getting mindful about muscular dystrophy and the impacts that disability has on our lives. And joining me for today's discussion, I've got Rhiannon Anderson. How are you going, Rhi?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, thank you. Where are you dialing in from today?
I'm dialing in from the ever so lovely garden city of Toowoomba.
Nice. Toowoomba up in the hills. I can say that because I'm down the hill on the coast. What's going on in Toowoomba today? Paint the picture of what Toowoomba is like living in.
Oh, well, I mean, it's very, very lovely place to live. I mean, it's called the Garden City for a reason. So many parks, and I don't feel like anyone can fully explore every single park. There's way too many of them. But no, it's lovely. I mean, this time of year, it's starting to get rather chilly, which is unfortunate, but it's not too bad. It's a pretty good place to live, I must say.
It's a bit of a country lifestyle, isn't it?
I feel like it's a blend. It's not quite country. It's not quite city. It's a mishmash of both, I feel, which works.
Which is actually probably paints the picture of Brisbane and Greater Brisbane more broadly. It's a big country town. I mean, I grew up in Adelaide, so they say that's a big country town, but then Brisbane's like the next version of that. So totally get what you mean. And it is a beautiful place to go and be. And I've visited many times at Toowoomba. So it's nice to have another Queenslander on the show. But Rhi, to introduce you to the audience, this isn't an episode on Toowoomba, but we will talk about Toowoomba today, I guess, is you're a law graduate. You're a founder of a life coaching business called Living Abled. You're a public speaker, and you're also diagnosed with muscular dystrophy. So we're talking off air about how I'd love to bring the lived experience of disability and psychosocial conditions to the podcast so that we can broaden our awareness and mindset around disability and how it impacts us. So I'd love to start off for people that haven't heard of muscular dystrophy before. Can you share a bit about what it is and how it impacts you?
Sure thing. So muscular dystrophy, it's rather complicated to try and explain because I believe there's probably around 26 different types of it, give or take, and it affects everybody differently and how it impacts, your muscles completely differently. But in a nutshell, what muscular dystrophy is in the name muscle, so it impacts your muscles, and dystrophy basically, weakness. So you're born with weak muscles to begin with. And depending on where that is sort of in the muscle, some people, for example, have Duchenne muscular dystrophy, which is the most common type, most well-known type. And basically that affects the dystrophin gene. So when you use your muscles, the dystrophin will usually repair it and rebuild your muscles that way. But for guys that have Duchenne, you use your muscles, it files down, but your muscles won't repair. So the degree of weakness is more rapid, and it impacts essentially every muscle in your body. So heart, lungs, the works, swallowing muscles, the ability to talk, blink, all that sort of stuff. For me, with my type of MD, mine's called Ulrich's. Having said that, there's a few specialists now that are questioning my biopsy results, and they're sort of putting me between Ulrich's and Bethlem. So they're very, very similar. They're still the collagen 6A2 gene, which is mine, but I've sort of got characteristics and symptoms of both. So for me, I'm very, very lucky in that I can still walk. Specialists at the time when I was diagnosed said that I wouldn't be walking past the age of about 11, which is roughly thereabouts the time that people with Duchenne stop walking and rely on mobility aids. But for me, I'm still able to walk short distances. It impacts sort of my lung function, which is the big one for me, and my lung capacity, ability to get up and down off of chairs and things like that, putting on shoes. It will also contract my joints and my muscles. So, for example, my arms are sort of bent inwards a little bit. I can't straighten them completely. And same with my Achilles, I walk on my toes, which some
Mm.
people think is nifty. And think that I can walk in heels. I cannot walk in heels to save my life. So, yeah, that's a little bit about MD.
When did MD come into your life? It was a young age, I understand.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed when I was 3. So muscular dystrophy is something you're born with. You can't, contrary to what people in my school used to think, it's not something you can catch. It's something you are born with. Some people have it because their parents, one parent might have already had MD. For me, no one in my family has a history of muscular dystrophy. I was that one in, I think it was a 1 in 4, which was even more bizarre given that no one in my family has a history of it. So yeah, it popped up then, but I wasn't formally diagnosed until when I was 3.
Yeah, if you're none of your family had it, like, do they know like where it comes? Is it like a gene? Is it like how does it come if you haven't had the family history?
That I'm still trying to work out. I did have a geneticist appointment way back in year 12, so I was 16 at the time, which is a very heavy conversation to have when you're 16 and they're talking about, well, who's to blame, if is anyone to blame, and what's your likelihood of having children and all that sort of stuff. But at the time, they were trying to figure it out. And I think they just came back to it was just a complete fluke, from what I recall.
Is it quite a common condition?
Oh, I'm not sure on the stats specifically, but it's certainly not common at all. Duchenne's sort of the more prevalent in the muscular dystrophy family. But for me, my condition is even more rare than what
Mm.
Duchenne is. So the research and treatments available is even less so than people with Duchenne. But yeah, I'm not sure of the stats, but it is rare.
And I guess adds to that flukiness of, without the family history, yeah, for you to experience that. And so you mentioned that you being diagnosed at 3, like what were the symptoms or signs that led to that diagnosis? Have your parents talked about it?
Yeah, I mean, me and my family, we're great in that we share a lot and are very, very open and honest with each other. And I did ask way back in the day what led to that, sort of going down that path of trying to get a diagnosis. I was the first child, so they hadn't had experience with it, so they weren't sure of the right milestones that I was meant to be hitting. But a few of the telltale signs was I never could crawl the typical way that a toddler could crawl. I would commando crawl and belly crawl and things like that. And whenever I'd go to stand up off the floor, I'd have to sort of walk my hands up my legs to stand up, whereas so many people can just sort of put their legs under them and hop up that way. For me, that was never something that I could do. And my grandparents actually pointed out to them that something wasn't quite right. I was trying to get up their stairs at their place, at my grandparents' place. They said to my parents, like, something doesn't look right. She's taking a little bit longer, and how she's trying to navigate the stairs is just a little bit different. So that was sort of the one thing that made them go, okay, we might need to go speak to someone about this, and which then started a whole whirlwind journey and a trip to Sydney, I believe, and yeah.
I was going to ask you that, like, what's the diagnosis process? I mean, that was a fair while ago now, and obviously you're 3, so you don't remember any of it probably. But yeah, how complicated is it to go through that diagnosis process?
I mean, I sort of got most of the story from my family and how scary and uncertain that was for them. But yeah, I vaguely recall memories of laying in a hospital bed kicking and screaming for my family after I woke up, because how they diagnosed, they did a muscle biopsy. I've got a good scar on my leg from where they did the biopsy, and they didn't alert my family that I was back in recovery. And my family had to go and ask a doctor, how's everything going? It's taking a while. Is everything okay? Because being under anesthesia for someone with MD is quite risky. And they're like, is everything okay? And they're like, oh, she's back in her room. And they're like, okay. And they ran in and I was kicking and screaming, and that wasn't enjoyable. But the process, seeing so many doctors and specialists, and my mother in particular can very much vividly still recall the day of that she received the diagnosis with my dad. And she said she just had that feeling. She was sitting in my room and she said to my dad, I have a feeling from now on things are never going to be the same again. She said she just had that gut feel. And yeah, the doctor took him into their room. He said, one look. So as soon as I looked at the doctor, I knew something wasn't right. And he said, she's got muscular dystrophy. They'd never heard of it, obviously, before. And they're like, oh, so she just has to take medication thinking it's some kind of, maybe epilepsy or diabetes or something that requires medication. And they're like, no, there's no treatment. And oh, by the way, her prognosis, you're lucky to have it till she's 19. So go home, love her. There's nothing you can do, which obviously you can imagine the mental toll that took my parents down was immense.
I mean, you hearing these stories as well, that would be, I guess, traumatizing to some degree as well. Like you hearing your parents retell that conversation. How much did that impact you when you first heard that?
I can't remember exactly the age I was when I found out about that. But for me, I felt a lot of guilt sort of later on, sort of in my early teens, when the penny started to drop a little bit more and I started to feel guilty going, oh my gosh, what the pain that I put my parents through and the worry that I put them through. But I didn't know the prognosis side of it until I was not snooping at all, but my mum had her emails left open and there was an email from the Starlight group and she gave them information about my prognosis and my history. And that was the first time that I'd seen that the prognosis was about 18, 19. And at that point, I was only about 11 or 12 when I found that email. So that was terrifying and constantly every single day going, my gosh, I'm literally only just going to finish high school. Like, I haven't lived yet. Like, that's not fair.
Absolutely. Like, 'cause you're in high school, you can't wait for the end of it. But for you, like, that's like almost like a deadline's coming. Like, what's going to happen? And how did that impact you as a teenager? Like, because school's hard in itself, and to go to school with disability, but also having like this, what's going to happen after school? Like, how did that impact you?
Oh, I think it was a compound effect. I wasn't the most popular at school. I was bullied naturally, being the kid with the mobility scooter and a funny walk and things like that. I stuck out more. And I was one of the only kids in a mobility scooter. So I was prime target for bullies. But yeah, that trying to deal with an ever-changing condition that gets worse and noticing that it's getting worse and you can't keep up with your friends and go on the shopping trips, that they do or go for sleepovers because, there's stairs and things like that I could no longer navigate independently. The mental toll that it took was quite enormous. And there was a period of time, I'd like to say probably around when I was 13, give or take, where it got really dark mentally. I lost my grandfather a few years prior, the day after my 8th birthday. And that sort of, I was struggling with that grief process and that grief cycle and dealing with the disability going, I'm changing, I'm getting worse and I can't stop it. And then I've got people at school calling me a retard and ditching me on chairs that I can't get up from. And I'm 20 minutes late to class because no teacher would come and find me. And it was so tricky to try and navigate, the school world that's notoriously difficult for so many kids already. But yeah, there was a period of time where it was really dark and I did contemplate what it would be like if I just wasn't here. And, I was like, oh, my family won't suffer anymore. They can be free. My brother can go do whatever he wants. He doesn't have to take a day off school to come and sit in a hospital room in Brisbane with me. He doesn't have to see his sister struggle. It would just be easier. And that was a scary day.
And did you ever open up about that to, say, family or a doctor? Or like, who did you discuss that with?
I hadn't discussed it with anybody for a number of years. Full disclosure and probably maybe a bit of a warning, but I did contemplate and almost attempt self-harm and suicide in front of my brother at the time. And, he just was the typical brother and niggle. And that was just the stick that broke the camel's back for me. And I'm like, I've had enough. And he screamed out for my dad and he came running. And he's like, hey, just so you know, if you do this, you'll be hurting so much more people. Everyone loves you and cares about you and you will be doing more harm if you go through with this. And I didn't tell my mum that, and my mum and I, we share everything. We're best friends. And I didn't tell her about that day for years. And I only told her about that, I'd like to say 4 or 5 years ago. She knew that I was struggling. like she knew. But the day I told her, she said, I didn't know you were struggling that much.
Is that your rock bottom? Like, and did things get better from there? I guess you've had that conversation with your dad, your brother was there. Where did things start to turn around for you?
Yeah, that was 100% rock bottom. I'd never felt so low. I don't know. I think I tapped into something. Like, I refused professional help. My parents both said, honey, I think it's time. And this was, fast forward to year 12. I was struggling with friends and everything else and just really still feeling low. And they said to me, we should take you to see a psychologist. And I flat out refused. I'm like, you're going to have to take me to kicking and screaming. I'm not going. And they sort of instilled a little bit of tough love. And they're like, well, you got to figure out a way through this then. We can't keep hearing the same story. It's doing our mental health no good either. And we're trying to support you, but you then need to help yourself. And I think I just tapped into something and I'm like, well, I need to find something to hold on to and give me purpose. Right now I don't have it and I need to find that reason for why I'm here. And so I latched onto my schoolwork. That was the thing. I'm like, I know I'm good at this. It doesn't require physical strength. Schoolwork is my everything. And so I devoted all my time to that. And I think that's what got me through trying to rebuild myself. And I wish that I could be like, oh, these are the 5 steps, but I don't know what it was. I think I just found something every day that I could just hold on to. And I think in a weird way, my grandfather's passing also, because he passed from cancer and he was a veteran. And, veterans are notoriously resilient and strong and stubborn. And I'm like, well, if he could somehow deal through all of that and get through his grandkids' birthdays that he said he was going to do, I have to try and find something of that and apply it to my life. And I think that's sort of what also helped me start to slowly put the building back together.
It's interesting where we find these kind of shining light or internal light bulb moments. You're expressing like in your teens, you've been at your darkest days. And I remember for me, when my obsessive compulsive disorder and depression and anxiety was at its max, like it was my darkest days around 13, 14, 15, roughly. I remember some nights going to bed wishing I never woke up because I wouldn't have to think about the things that I thought about, particularly with the OCD, with these ruminating thoughts and the behaviors around that. And I don't know where mine shining light came from either. Like it was just like a moment in time in bed where I said to myself, Simon, the sun will always shine tomorrow. No matter how dark today is, tomorrow's another chance or another beginning. And I don't know where this came from. And I've stuck with that. That was my little beacon of hope that one day, like, things would get better. And I actually didn't get help for another decade afterwards and never spoke about it. So it's interesting where this comes, like for you, the schoolwork, or maybe thinking about your grandfather and holding on to that. And I guess it's a cross between hope, things will get better in some sort of way, and resilience. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on hope and resilience and the importance when you're struggling with not just disability, but life's challenges as well. Like school is hard for every kid, or for the majority of them. Yeah, talk to us about hope and resilience and why maybe they're things that we should tap into.
Good question. Very good question. I think resilience and hope is something that I feel every human needs, whether or not that is to get them through something or that just simply to experience that next level. If you're talking about resilience, that feeling of, the daily grind and just plugging away and chipping away and knowing the alternative is perhaps something negative. And hope, I feel, is also that stepping stone. I feel like hope and resilience sort of work hand in hand together. Without hope, you may not have resilience, and without resilience, you may not have hope. And to see people that don't have hope for themselves and sit there and turn to substances as a way to numb out and to just get through a day, it breaks my heart, honestly, to see that. And, my heart goes out to them and it's like, how can we get you back to feeling alive again? But in order to do that, there has to be some sort of resilience and to keep going. It may be hard now. It may not be hard in the future, but even if it is, I know I'm strong enough and capable enough and have the tools to be able to get through that. And living with a disability, or without, there's a level of resilience that you're almost born with, and especially diagnosed at such a young age. And for so many of us in the community that are living with it from childhood and not knowing anything different, there is that level of resilience to still push and be like, no, I want to go out in the playground. No, I want to do this, and I'm going to find a way to do it because I deserve to be able to do that. And then once you have that, it's like, oh, well, what else can I do? Once you have a taste for that little bit of success or that little bit of upside, then it's like, okay, well, what else can I do? And then I feel like that's where hope comes in. And, whether or not you may feel stronger, one morning you wake up and be like, oh, I actually physically feel good today. I mentally feel, okay, well, there's a little glimmer of hope. And that sort of then propels you on if you use it that way.
A lot of the guys that I work with in my therapy clinic, they feel like they've lost hope or they're not resilient. And I just highlight that they're still showing up every day. And that's in itself resilience. And as soon as they go that, I go, oh, really? And then that maybe start to switch that internal light bulb on just for a moment and go, oh, maybe there is hope because I am showing up every day and so forth. I mean, she's also like the impact on your family. Like you're the first child and disabilities entered their life and disability hasn't been a part of their life before. Have they ever talked about the impacts of disability on the family unit and how maybe they interact with community or their friends and any stigmas or discrimination around that?
I mean, whenever the topic of family comes up, it's always a loaded question, and it's always very, very complicated because everyone's individual. Everyone has their own thoughts, their own beliefs, their own feelings, and their own coping mechanisms. I'm very, very lucky in that I have a lot of family who are so supportive and so invested and willing to go above and beyond to make sure that I do feel a part of things and that I am supported, and they've shown up to every fundraiser and that I've done and every event that I've done and donated their hard-earned money to causes and to try and help other people like myself have hope. But with anything that, a diagnosis that is terminal, there's always going to be that mental toll. And there are some family that find that topic very, very difficult. And so disability life is not discussed. It's almost like a little bit of an elephant in the room. It's there, but acknowledging it and talking about it is too hard for them, especially sort of talking about, death and what the disease could do to me later down the line. And I respect that 110%. I respect that not everyone is open to talking about that and those realizations, and I 100% respect it. And I don't hold any grudge at all. Similar to, I don't hold a grudge to anyone who may not feel comfortable or confident to do certain things. I mean, it's their feelings and thoughts, and they're their own person, and I don't want to sort of force the disability life onto them in any way, shape or form. But I'm very, very lucky in that family are always so supportive, which in turn they've then gone on to help other people, whether that is through fundraisers and donating money to other charities or, my brother in particular, he's been a very vocal person when he was in school, and I think living with someone with a disability, the biases and the stigma and the discrimination went out the door. He was so accepting of anyone and everybody. And I believe, he might correct me once he hears this, but I believe when he was starting to date and things like that, and he's like, oh, my sister's got a disability, if anyone was sort of like, oh, he'd be like, no, okay, I'm not interested. And yeah, he's my biggest protector and my biggest support person, even though the sibling banter and rivalry. But yeah, I think having him grow up with someone with a disability has really helped him be so much more patient and accepting and more open-minded, I would say.
Reflecting back on school, like having someone like you're in a wheelchair or a scooter, like how did you get around school in terms of accessibility and accessing classrooms and so forth? Was that an issue for you?
It wasn't. I mean, I was very lucky that I could still walk into classrooms, but I did use a mobility scooter, especially in high school to navigate from one side of campus to the other. And I was lucky at high school particular, we had a ramp to get up to the upstairs portion of the school, but they had half of it done. So you could only get through one entrance point to upstairs. Now there's two. There's 2 points. There's sort of little offshoots of the ramp, which is good. But before that, when there was only one, I could only access upstairs via the library. And the library had a wood door, which probably weighed 15 kilos maybe. It was a heavy door, and I can't lift more than 2-3 kilos. So to try and navigate that, and so I'd have a buzzer that I'd ring the librarian to let me in, but the buzzer wasn't loud, so she wouldn't hear it unless she was in her office. And there were many times where I was 5 or so minutes late to class because I was stuck outside the door and I couldn't get in. But for the most part, accessibility at school was really easy. And they made sure, especially in high school with the timetabling, that if they could help it, all my classrooms were downstairs. And there was only maybe one class, especially while that other part of the ramp was being built, would be upstairs. Once that other part I was able, they could put us wherever. But yeah, I was very fortunate in that way.
What about accessibility at home? Because the home's also a different, quite unique environment. Like, did your family have to make any major modifications to the house to facilitate the aids that you needed? Like, talk us through the home environment and accessing that as well.
I'm very, very lucky in that when my parents built this place, it was already one level, very easy to get in and out of, things like that. But there has been over the years, there's sort of been slight changes. For example, we've put a rubber ramp out the side near the laundry so I can get out and outside and things like that, because there is a step, I don't know, probably a little bit bigger than that. I'd probably say 10 centimetre step, maybe a little bit bigger, give or take, which that getting older has become more of a challenge, and then also a safety risk as well. There's been times where I've gone to get up a small step and fallen backwards. So there's been little tweaks like that, but for the most part, my aids here at home have just been sort of, whether it be a over toilet frame or things like that. And, that might sort of make people feel a bit, uncomfortable talking, but it's like, that's a side to disability life that's not spoken about. And so it's important to be like, hey, this is normalize it. This is just what happens. But other than that, accessibility and sort of independence in the home, I trained my late border collie to be a little bit of my assistance dog. And so she would pick up things off the floor for me and take my socks off, albeit especially if I wanted an extra piercing in my foot, she'd, be more than happy to oblige. But I was able to do that. And so the home for me is where I'm the most independent in sort of getting around.
And we're opening up this conversation around, we're talking about normalising conversations around disability. And I guess the last few years we've had this thing called the National Disability Insurance Scheme that's been rolled out nationwide. And before that, it was all very much state-based systems. I was fortunate, in the 4 years that I worked in the National Disability Insurance Agency as a senior planner, I was able to sit down with people with disability and help fund the disability support needs that they need to live independently, essentially, live the life that they want to live. I'm going to assume here that you're part of the NDIS. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the scheme. If it is, how's it working? How can we improve it? Yeah, talk us through your journey with the NDIS.
I honestly feel like NDIS is something I could talk about all day. For the most part, my experience with the NDIS has been really positive. I haven't had too many major issues compared to a lot of other people. I have friends and acquaintances who have been struggling for years to get on the scheme, and I hope one day that they'll finally be able to. I feel that the scheme, I think, is a good concept and a very, very good idea and very needed, especially given disability employment rates at the moment, and people can't afford to fund their own needs, which it's the 21st century. I feel like, having a disability shouldn't impact you from going and making an honest day's living and being a valued member to society. But in the meantime, we needed something to bridge that gap and to try and make sure people can get the funding and get out in the community that they need. So I feel like NDIS definitely has a place. Is it well polished? I'd say it's still definitely a work in progress. And for me, my experiences with it was the first initial meeting to get on it was very confronting because they want to know your worst day. what's your worst day and focusing on all the things you can't do. And when I first got on the scheme, I'd just come out of high school. And so it was very daunting and confronting to talk about, oh, so you can't do this. It's like, no. Oh, you can't do that. I'm like, no. And I had to take a break. I'm like, mentally, I can't. Like, I like to think of all the things I can do and feel a capable human being. And right now I'm not feeling like a capable human being. I'm just having a stick poked at me. Can you do this? Can you do that? No. And so that was very, very difficult. But then once I was on it, I'm able to do weekly exercise physiology appointments, see a therapist, see my own psychologist and equine assisted therapist as well, which she's worth her weight in gold. And I absolutely love that kind of therapy. And to be able to afford, the ramp outside and things like that. So it definitely, when it works 110%. But the idea that the funding is meant to be reduced as you go along because the idea is you'll become more independent, I feel that idea needs to change. I had my physio budget considerably cut by probably about 3/4 this last plan. And I said, well, I attend weekly physio. And they said, oh, look, the improvements that you've made, the idea is that you'll slowly come off the funding. So I'm having to have my physio and my exercise physiologist write up another report because the NDIS believe that exercise physiology and physio are one and the same. They provide the same service. So having to explain that it's not and have to beg for funding, otherwise I won't receive the weekly treatment, which has got me to be able to walk further and do a 5K walk with only 4 weeks worth of training and lift more and be more active. That's tricky. So I think there's always room for improvement. And I hope that one day NDIS will become the flawless machine that it needs to be for so many people.
You've touched on a lot of things that I hear a lot in the disability space, and also when I worked there, but also now I'm a therapist outside as I'm a provider now and providing that therapeutic support for people with progressive disability or with new disability or with cyclical disability as well, so the psychosocial stuff as well. It can be very challenging, and hearing a lot of talk around cutbacks on funding, trying to keep it financially sustainable, which is challenging, but also, taking funding away is not necessarily helping. It's also like hindering progress. You get to a certain point and you still need that support to go further and achieve the goals that you want to achieve. It's a goals-based system. How did it compare? How does being on the NDIS compare to life before NDIS for you? Like, were you on the state-based system or how did you navigate that?
So before NDIS, I was receiving support through Montrose Access, which they're still thriving today and a great organisation. And so they, for me, were my one-stop hub for, orthotics, for AFOs, which I did not wear because I'm a shocking patient. But all of that support, neurology, OTs, they were all there. So I got onto them very, very early on through one of the mums in the MD group that my mum went to. And she's like, you need to get onto Montrose. They're amazing. They will help. In school, they'll come visit, all that sort of stuff. And so I went to them originally 6 monthly, which then got spun out to 12 monthly because like, hey, you're doing so well. Like, this is great. And they would come to school to make sure that everything was set up. And if I needed anything, they tried to talk me out of doing a 2K cross country. They're like, hey, look, safety wise, if you hurt yourself, if you break a leg, you won't be able to walk again. I'm like, at least I had broken something doing that I wanted to do and enjoyed, as opposed to my disability robbing me of that opportunity. So respectfully, I'm going to do it. And they're like, okay, we back you in. I'm like, okay, cool. But yeah, so before NDIS, it was a lot of support through Montrose and then having to go through lung functions and things like that at the Mater Children's in Brisbane and things like that. So beforehand, I was very lucky in that my condition, I didn't need a lot of support in the early days. It's more as I'm getting older and my condition's progressing that the support is needing to sort of come in a little bit more and a little bit be more available. So I'm very, very lucky in that regard that I didn't need that extra support earlier.
You were saying that as you've got older, so obviously you finished school and you turned 18 and that initial prognosis hasn't occurred. Like, talk us through that. Like, did you have a sense of relief? Did they extend the date? Did they do some new observations? Talk us through getting through that really, I want to say, scary period where you're not sure what's going to happen after your 18th birthday.
I did. For a long time, I sort of had 18 as the benchmark and the cornerstone. And at the time, I eventually became more at peace with it. It was still scary, but I became more at peace with it. I found sort of religion in a way to be that help in my own way. Let me just clarify that, in my own way. And I'm like, well, I'm here for a reason. And whatever that reason is, if I'm meant to go at 18, I'm meant to go, terrifying, but I've had some great experiences. I'm okay with it. No, but I'm okay. But when I got 18 and I had my last appointment in the pediatrics realm before I went into the adult system, my neurologist, she did her typical reflex test and lung function, and I had a heart scan and they did all the works. And she's like, you know what? She said, you've stabilized. You're not significantly progressing, you're not declining rapidly. You almost sort of stabilized a little bit. And she said, do you know what? Provided everything still goes the same, she said, I would probably say you won't start noticing things to get bad until you're probably about in your 40s or 50s, as when average, everyday people without a disability will sort of experience the old niggle and the old pain and, the body's slowing down. She's like, she said, all things going well and your lungs holding out. She said, about 40 or 50. And I left that appointment crying, but finally for happy tears and like, okay, let's just go for it and let's go and ride horses if you want to ride horses and let's go and experience new things. So there's a level of freedom. Do I still think about what it can be? 110%, it's that will never go away, but it sort of gives me that, okay, well, am I doing what I want to be doing right now? Is the path that I'm on right for me? And will I get to that time and go, okay, I've got regrets or I've got absolutely no regrets and life was great? And that's what I choose to try and focus on and use that. Be like, hey, no regrets, no apologies. Once you get there, it's like, hey, I did everything and I'm cool with that.
Yeah. So life took you into a law degree. Like, where did the passion for law come from? Like, how did that come about?
It's a very weird story. I originally wanted to become an actress and was obsessed with film and television. And then I was told, honey, there's no roles for people like you. Disability roles are few and far between. Think of something else. And at the time, self-worth was down the drain. And I'm like, okay, I didn't try and fight back on that. And then one day, given my film and TV nerdiness, I started binging Criminal Minds out of nowhere. And I was like, what they do is absolutely amazing, and how they think, the profiling and the psychology aspect, this is amazing. And how do I do that? And my godmother was and still is in the police. And I said, I want to be a criminologist. She goes, oh, there's only one criminologist for all of Queensland. Pick something else. And I'm like, okay, well, I want to be able to be a voice to those who don't have one and to help those people, because I know what it's like to not feel heard or, respected or walked all over. How do I do that? Law, be a lawyer. Okay. And so I put the acting dreams to one side and decided, okay, I'll do law. And I focused on legal studies throughout year 11 and 12 of high school, which then got me, I did a Head Start program through USQ where I did a semester of uni while I was still in school. So it was just like one subject of uni, and that gave me guaranteed entry into law once I graduated, and ended up finishing my law degree and was hell-bent on becoming a lawyer until the last probably 6 months of my degree. And I'm like, no, being a lawyer perhaps isn't for me, but I can still find a way in law somewhere, whether that's lecturing in human rights or things like that, and going and doing my PhD, which is still definitely a goal of mine in the future. But yeah, life definitely did take me down that road, but I built a backbone doing that degree. I learned to start speaking up for myself more, and before that I was timid and quiet, and I left my first lecture crying on the phone to my mum going, I can't do this, all these people are too strong for me and they're so assured of themselves and I'm not that. And no, one look and I crumble, like I can't do it. But now I can sit in a room full of lawyers and hold my own and in any room. So I owe a lot to that degree, and degrees are never a waste of money.
Why is it important for you to give voice to disability and to people just like you? Why is that something that is a burning desire for you?
I think because I know what it's like to be singled out and to be continuously reminded that you are different and that there's nothing that you can do otherwise that will change that. And so the level of acceptance is not there, and you just want someone to see you and to hear you and understand you. And I think I was physically bullied when I was 9. I was kicked and scratched and stood on and things like that. And the pain of that mixed with the verbal bullying and being called names and things like that, it gets to you. And I just felt compelled to help people and to really just to be that voice for them and for them to come to me and be like, I need help. And I had people through school, I'd never spoken to them a day in their life, and they'd come to me and be like, Rhiannon, I have this problem. And I'm sitting there going, you don't talk to me normally. Like, this is weird, but okay, I will listen. Don't know how much I can help, but I'll listen. And I loved that. And I felt that law was a way to provide that help. And for someone to know that there's someone that's got their back and will back them in when the going gets tough without judgment. I think that's that was important for me.
We often talk about bullying, discrimination, often happening in school. Like that's when we all remember it. But like, has it progressed into day-to-day life outside of school and into your current career as well? Have you noticed it?
I think in the social media space, I noticed it. I given my views on a few things, and being that I sort of was told to go burn in hell, and that they hoped that, I would be condemned to hell and purgatory and things like that, which for a young human is very difficult and very scary to have that much animosity thrown your way. I've definitely had experiences of bullying and things like that I probably may never ever speak about, but yeah, I think it creeps in, and the discrimination, especially nightlife in Toowoomba. There's not a lot of bars and nightclubs that are disability friendly and accessible. So trying to go on a pub crawl or a nightclub crawl is close to impossible. You can sort of only limited to a couple of bars. And a lot of people go, oh, well, you've got a couple. Just be happy that you can access a few. Like, at least you can do it. It's like, but I want to go into this bar down the road. Like, it's got great reviews. I want to go, but I can't. And there's always that sort of heated debate around, oh, you've got this, just be happy. And that sort of lends itself to a little bit of friction and tension. But for the most part, compared to a lot of other people, I'm certainly lucky that I don't experience any sort of blowback sort of on the daily.
And so how does it impact you, like socially and things like that? So we remember the school time and how challenging that was. What's it like developing new friendships or sustaining friendships now as an adult, relationships? How does that all play out for you?
I feel like I'm an introverted extrovert. I like my own time. I like being alone, but also that sort of feeds into, trying to when I go to try and do different things and go and experience different things, trying to make friendships and hold on to those friendships are difficult. It's an area that I'm definitely working on and being more, I'm just going to drop in and message these people and see how they're going. And hey, it's been a while. Let's go catch up for a drink or let's go for coffee. But making friends is certainly, it's harder, I think, because people don't know how to interact and how to plan functions or plan a day out with someone with a disability. And then I think people go, do you know what, I'm not going to worry about that because it's too daunting and I don't want to do the wrong thing. So it comes from the right place, but then trying to maintain those friendships is harder.
Does that impact things like dating as well?
Dating's very complicated again, especially in today's realm where, online dating is more of the standard, especially when, I can't go out freely and I don't drive. So having to make sure that, hey, can someone take me places is tricky. So and I would never feel comfortable just to sit at a bar by myself. So online dating has sort of become the standard for me. And I mean, I've been very, very lucky to go on a couple of dates. And there was one lovely guy who, it was almost like he just understood from the get-go. And I didn't need to explain anything to him. I didn't need to rationalize. I didn't need to make excuses. When it came to our first date, he's like, do you know what? You pick the venue. I don't care where it is, as long as it's wheelchair friendly. And I gave him a few suggestions, and he goes, oh yeah, it looks wheelchair friendly. Yep, okay, no worries. I'll go and organise this, this and this. And he's like, look, I'll come up to you. He was in Brisbane, and he's like, I'll come up to you. That way you don't have to worry about driving. He just got it, which was great. But unfortunately that fell away in sort of a rather sad way. I sort of felt a little bit led on, which happens. But I don't know, it's very, very difficult. I think I was told by people when I was younger that having low standards was more beneficial, as not every guy would want to date someone with the baggage of disability. And I felt that at the time, and I certainly, again, do not hold grudges over people that will not date someone with a disability, because it is extra baggage and extra consideration, and you're not just signing up to date the human, you're also signing up to go to doctor's appointments and pretty much in sickness and in health, pretty much from the jump. It's not, hey, let's get married first and let's worry about this. It's, hey, from the get-go, which is a lot for some people to handle. So yeah, I'm sure that eventually one day Mr. Right will come along. But until then, I'm just enjoying the process and having conversations and just meeting new people.
It's a really interesting topic, and this is why I brought it up, because we're seeing I used to see a lot as a planner, people trying to find dating groups to go on that are disability, friendly. We're seeing a lot of, Love on the Spectrum is blasting our screens on Netflix and stuff like that. And I think the NDIS has enlivened so many conversations. It's not just about getting your clothes on and going to work or getting community access. It's also about work, finding jobs. It's about studying. It's about having relationships and quality relationships. It's about socializing. It's not just getting you out of bed and feeding you every day in the disability space. And I think it's opening up that we're having some really positive conversations in this space about what independent, normal, in inverted commas, whatever normal is, life is. And that's what the NDIs can provide, with the supports around you, that you can develop your confidence and resilience and hope and know that you can live life on your terms as well. I think it's opening the door, but I think we've got a long way to go. And like with anything, there's always, as you said, there's always room for improvement. But some really interesting concepts as well for us to be mindful of. I'm a dad, what happens if my daughter had muscular dystrophy, and how would I support her through her lifetime and her relationship journey and all that type of stuff. It's really important, I think, for guys to tune into and hear these stories, whether it's a friend of theirs or a family member, a child, or themselves maybe, it impacts them as well. So we have really appreciated you coming on and sharing the story around disability and how it's impacted you and those around you. I'm keen to, before I let you go, to hear a bit about your business. So Living Abled, love you to share about where this came from and what you do there.
Yeah, Living Abled sort of started just as a hobby blog back in 2020. I don't need to summarize what happened in 2020, but for me, that was another very dark time mentally. It was very scary dealing with this unknown thing that was going around that was killing a lot of people. And for me, with any respiratory illness, any pneumonia or anything like that, it can kill me because my lung function's only at 40%. So that was a very terrifying time, and I was struggling with my mental health. And my psychologist said to me, she's like, do you know what? You need to try and put your energy into something more productive. Focus on something else, because I'd taken 6 months off of uni just because I wasn't coping. And she's like, look, you've got nothing else to do. Do something creative. She's like, do you write? Do you like to write? And I'm like, I'm that person in school that I would write 3-page short story instead of 1 page as set by the teacher. I loved it. And she's like, well, there you go. How about write? And I'm like, oh, I've thought about a blog, writing a blog. She goes, well, do that. And I went home that night and I had the name Living Abled down within 2 minutes. And everyone loved it. And I'm like, excellent, cool. And I just started writing weekly posts, sharing insights into life with disability and talking about so many different areas of it and different topics and things like that. And then I never expected it to sort of develop into anything other than just something fun. And I was going to go and do law and open my own firm and live the big smoke life as a lawyer. But once I realized that law was not for me, and I was like, but I want to help people. I need that. And I stumbled across life coaching, and I looked into it, and I ended up doing a Tony Robbins seminar and fell in love with that and the upsides of all of that. And so I thought, okay, I need to do this, and invested time into studying, and I'm still doing my diploma of life coaching at the moment. But yeah, I only opened up Living Able as a business officially in December. And so it's very early days still, but I absolutely love what I do. And I'm so grateful for all the twists and turns and lessons, because I can apply everything that, even though I'm nearly only 25, I feel like I've lived a lot. And so being able to take those experiences and be able to help people and give them a quality of life that they want but just don't know how to get, and be that cheerleader and that support for them and cheer them on, has been amazing.
Without giving your trade secrets away, if someone's listening and they want to sign up and do this coaching with you, what's the kind of things that they might expect from you?
I mean, I think what they can expect is no judgment. They can tell me anything and everything, and I'll be like, yeah, cool. I've heard it all by now, especially in law and living the disability life. I've heard everything. So no judgment, and just a fun time while also doing some good work. I'm that coach that may set homework, may not set homework. It depends. I sort of take a little bit of a different approach to the stock standard coaching. So a little bit more exercises, journaling, things like that. But I'm open-minded and will always, I think, push my clients to think outside the box. And they may come in with one thing and be like, oh, I want to change this. And as they're talking, I'll pick up and go, you sort of mentioned this a couple of times. How do you feel about this? And they go, oh, maybe I want to focus on that. So I think the open-mindedness, and I hold a space for people to just get down to work, which is good.
So this podcast goes worldwide. Do you support people internationally, or is it just in Australia?
No, 100% worldwide. I've spoken to people overseas. They'll get into my DMs and Instagram and just want to chat. And I'm always open just for a chat, and always hold that space for people who are struggling and just be, hey, I just need someone to talk to. And yeah, I've had people from India that have messaged and had a free call, things like that. So always interested in talking to people wherever they may be.
And is it just around muscular dystrophy or disability, or is it just pretty much broad?
No, it's very, very broad. I don't want to be sort of pigeonholing myself, and I wanted to create a service that helps anyone and everybody, anyone who's young adult, anyone who's a school leaver, 18 plus, anyone who needs that help. I didn't want to put myself into one box, because that's how I don't live my life in just one box. And so I didn't also want to discriminate as well inadvertently. I wanted to be like, hey, anyone, everyone, you're all welcome.
It sounds really cool. And as a business owner myself and a lived experience therapist myself, so you're a lived experience coach, there's so much, I think, beauty in using your lived experience to build quality connections with the people that we're serving and supporting. It goes a long way, I think, to building that faster than as opposed to if you just had the book smarts. If you've got the street smarts, you've walked in the shoes, you've worn the top on, you wore the hat, it certainly goes a long way. And that's what I love about my job as well, is being able to connect with guys on a deeper level, because I've been there and done similar. Not done that, because everyone's journey is unique to their own, but walked in similar pathways and so forth. So I'll put the link into the business in the show notes. Anyone can access that if they want to touch base. The last thing I like to ask all my guests is to plug something that makes you feel good. And the reason I ask this question is because we do go into some dark places that can be a bit distressing to some people. So I like to leave it on a lighter note. So what's something, and it can be anything that you're watching on telly or listening to or reading, or a self-care activity, something fun you're doing. What's something that's lighting you up at the moment?
Working with horses. Doing equine assisted therapy is what fills my cup at the moment, and riding horses and the feeling of freedom that gives me, and learning equine behavior and things like that. I absolutely adore that work, and it's almost meditative just being around horses, and it ticks that little country, that inner country woman of me. I absolutely love it. And I'm not afraid to be like, oh, covered in mud. Oh, I don't care. It's all part of it. So yeah, I absolutely love that.
That's so cool. And I've heard a lot about equine assisted therapy. I'm going to just extend it, if you don't mind me extending it for another couple of minutes. Just for anyone who hasn't heard about this, I've heard about it a lot, but anyone who hasn't heard about it, what is it?
Equine assisted therapy, in a nutshell and in my experience, is using horses as a way to assist with therapy. So instead of sitting in an office with a psychologist or things like that, you're more probably able to let your walls down a little bit more and talk while you're patting a horse and lunging and learning equine behavior than what you would sort of any other way. I mean, for me, I've done most of my healing in a round yard with a horse. They're a mirror. They echo back your thoughts, your feelings in a way that you wouldn't think possible. And so I've been able to heal a lot of trauma and a lot of grief, and have been able to accept my disability on a whole new level and feel so much more comfortable in my disability thanks to being in a round yard with horses that just no judgment and are there if you need to cry into their mane, they'll let you do it, and we'll also show you, okay, girl, we need to get some work done. So yeah, equine therapy, everyone, I'm a major advocate for that. And I feel every human being needs to spend some time with a horse. Doesn't need to be in therapy, but some time with a horse is always a good thing.
I love it. That sounds so cool. And again, Rhi, thanks so much for coming on, sharing your story. I've learned a lot and appreciated you opening up, getting vulnerable, and helping us men be mindful about what's going on around us. So thank you so much.
No, thank you for having me. I've had an absolute blast.
Well, that's a wrap for today's episode, and I hope you got some value from it. If anything triggered your mental health today, please reach out to your support networks. Also, if you loved what you heard, be sure to subscribe to the show and share it with your mates. For more from Mindful Men, you can check us out on Instagram and YouTube, and I'll throw the links to these pages in the show notes below. But until next time, stay mindful.